At 11:47 that night, my encrypted phone rang for the first time in 5 years. The moment I answered, I heard howling, wind-barking dogs, and my daughter crying so hard she could barely breathe. "Dad, please come get me. I escaped from my husband. I'm barefoot at a gas station, and his hunting dogs are searching the woods. They're getting closer." Then she whispered, "If my husband finds me before you do, I'll never get another chance to tell the truth." I grabbed my coat, gave 2 quiet orders, and before I reached the elevator, 3 armored SUVs were already waiting. That night, my son-in-law was about to discover what happens when a father has nothing left to lose. Welcome, and thank you for being here on Revenge Dad. I want to know who's in this with me. Comment below, what city or country are you watching from today? It means more than you know. Some elements of this story have been fictionalized for narrative and educational purposes. Names and locations are coincidental. The message, however, is worth your full attention. My name is Walter Harmon. I am 72 years old, and I have done things in this life that would make a lesser man lose sleep for decades. I do not say that to brag. I say it because you need to understand who is telling you this story and why, when a man like me sat alone in a dark office on the 38th floor of a Manhattan high-rise on the night of November the 14th, 2024, and heard his telephone ring, the sound of it nearly brought him to his knees. Not because I was afraid of the call, because I recognized the number. The office was dark except for the amber glow of the city below. I had been sitting there for 2 hours with a glass of bourbon I had not touched, staring at a stack of contracts I had not read. Outside, the wind was rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows, pushing a November cold front down from the north. The weather reports were calling it the first serious storm of the season. Vermont, they said, was already under 8 inches of snow, with more coming. I had not thought about Vermont in 5 years. The phone on my desk was not the kind of phone most people carry. It was a matte black device with no brand markings, a number known to fewer than a dozen people on this earth, and an encryption protocol that the FBI had been trying to crack since 2017. It vibrated once against the mahogany surface of my desk, and the sound of it cut through the quiet of that room like a blade. I looked at the screen. The number was not saved in my contacts. It did not need to be. I had memorized it the same way I had memorized everything that mattered to me. Not by choice, but because some things carve themselves into you, whether you want them to or not. It was my daughter's number. My chest did something then that I will not pretend was dignified. Something cracked open behind my ribs, sharp and sudden, like ice fracturing under too much weight. I stared at that number. For exactly 3 seconds I counted, and then I picked up the phone with a hand that was steadier than it had any right to be. "Savannah?" My voice came out low and even. 50 years of practice. What came back to me from the other end of the line was not a voice, not at first. It was the sound of wind, a brutal howling Vermont wind that tore through the receiver and filled my ear with cold. Then came the distant sound of a dog barking, then another, then a third. And then she spoke. "Daddy." The word was barely a whisper, broken at the edges like something that had been handled too roughly for too long. "Daddy, can you come get me?" I stood up from my chair so fast that the bourbon glass tipped and fell shattering on the floor at my feet. I did not look at it. "Savannah." I kept my voice level. I needed her to stay calm, and the only way to do that was to sound like a man who had everything under control, even when his heart was hammering against his sternum hard enough to bruise. "Talk to me. Where are you?" "Murphy's gas station." Her voice fractured on the second word, and I heard her swallow hard, fighting to hold herself together. "Route 9, Woodstock. I got out, Daddy. I got out of the house, but he's looking for me. He has dogs. I can hear them. They're getting closer, and I don't know how much time." "Stop!" The word came out sharper than I intended, and I heard her breath hitch. I softened it immediately. "Stop, sweetheart. I hear you. I need you to listen to me right now. Are you inside the gas station? There's a payphone outside. I'm standing next to it. It's so cold, Daddy." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I heard her crying, then not the loud, messy crying of someone who had given up, but the quiet, shaking tears of someone desperately trying not to. It was somehow worse. I didn't have any money. The man inside let me use the payphone for free. I don't have shoes. The image of that hit me somewhere beneath the sternum and buried itself there like a hook. My daughter, standing in a Vermont snowstorm, in her bare feet, hiding next to a payphone, listening to dogs get closer in the dark. I crossed the office in 4 strides and pulled open the door. Raymond Cole was in the hallway. He was always in the hallway when he needed to be. 30 years of working together had given us a rhythm that required no explanation. He took one look at my face and straightened up from the wall. 3 cars, I said. Full team, armored, now. Raymond Cole did not ask questions. That was why he had worked for me for 3 decades. He was already reaching for his phone as he turned down the hallway. I put mine back to my ear. Savannah, are you still there? I'm here. A shuddering breath. Daddy, he had papers, some kind of medical papers. He said he was going to use them to take me back, that I was sick, that nobody would believe me. Nobody is taking you anywhere. The certainty in my voice surprised even me. It came from somewhere deep and old and completely non-negotiable. I need you to do one thing. Just one. Can you do that? Yes. Small, brave. So much like her mother, it made my teeth ache. Stay near that phone. Stay in the light. If you hear those dogs getting any closer, you go inside that station and you do not come back out. Tell the man inside to lock the door. Can you do that? Spoof. In Iostes IF. Yes. A pause. Then, Daddy, I think if he finds me tonight, he's going to kill me. The words landed in that dark office like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples, spreading out, reaching every corner. I looked down at the shattered bourbon glass on the floor, at the amber liquid spreading across the hardwood, and I made a decision standing there in the dark that I would not touch another drop of it until my daughter was safe in my building, breathing clean air, and the man who had put fear in her voice like that had been removed from her life as completely and permanently as I knew how to remove things. Raymond, I called down the hallway without taking the phone from my ear. How long? Raymond appeared in the doorway already in his coat. Engines are running, 15 minutes to the garage, 4 hours to Woodstock if the roads are clear, less if they're not. I put the phone back to my lips. Savannah, we're coming. 4 hours. 4 hours! She repeated it like a prayer, like something to hold on to. Keep this line open as long as you can. And Savannah? I stopped. There were 1,000 things I wanted to say. 5 years of things piled up in a hallway I had never been able to open. I'm coming, that's all. I'm coming. The wind screamed through the receiver, and somewhere in the dark of a Vermont snowstorm, my daughter whispered, "Okay, Daddy, okay." I grabbed my coat from the rack by the door and walked out of that office without looking back. The bourbon could wait. The contracts could wait. Everything in my life that was not my daughter could wait for as long as it needed to. Raymond was holding the elevator. As the doors closed behind us, he looked at me just once, just briefly, and I saw in his eyes the same thing I felt burning behind mine. "She's alive," I said. "That's what matters." Raymond nodded. "Then let's go get her." The elevator began to drop, and 40 floors below us, 3 black SUVs were already idling in the garage, their engines a low, steady thunder in the cold. The garage beneath my building is the kind of place that does not appear on any city permit. It runs 3 levels below street level, accessed by a freight elevator that requires a biometric scan and a 6-digit code that changes every 72 hours. The vehicles kept there are not the kind you register at the DMV. They are built for specific purposes, and on the night of November 14th, 3 of them rolled out of that garage and onto the streets of Manhattan at 11:52 in the evening, their headlights cutting through a freezing rain that had not yet decided whether it wanted to be sleet. Raymond drove the lead vehicle. He always drove the lead vehicle. In 30 years, I had never asked him why, and he had never explained it. Some things between men who have worked together that long do not require explanation. They simply are. I sat in the passenger seat with my phone pressed to my ear, listening to the open line I had kept connected to the payphone at Murphy's gas station on Route 9. For the first 11 minutes of the drive, I heard nothing but wind and the occasional creak of what I assumed was the metal housing of the payphone moving in the storm. Then faintly I heard my daughter's voice not speaking to me, but to someone else. "I'm okay," she was saying. "My dad is coming. He's coming." She said it the way a person says something they are desperately trying to believe. My jaw tightened until I felt the ache of it spread up into my temples, and I turned to look out the window at the black wall of the highway, median rushing past us. Raymond had us doing 90 on I-91 north, and the 2 vehicles behind us were matching speed without being told. The rain had turned to snow somewhere around the Connecticut border, fat, wet flakes that smeared across the windshield and made the road ahead look like static on an old television set. ETA, I said. Raymond glanced at the navigation screen mounted in the center console. 4 hours and 8 minutes with current road conditions. He paused. I can make it 3:45. Make it 3:20. Raymond pressed his lips together, not in disagreement, but in the way of a man doing calculations in his head that he would rather not share out loud. Then he pressed the accelerator down another inch, and the SUV surged forward, its engine barely registering the demand. I turned back to the window. The problem with long drives in the dark, when you are a man of 72 and the adrenaline has not yet found a place to settle, is that your mind goes to places you have spent years training it to avoid. It went there now. It went to the last time I had seen Savannah 5 years ago, in the lobby of this very building, her face set in the particular way of a young woman who has made a decision she knows is going to cost her something, but has decided the cost is worth it. "I can't do this anymore, Dad." That was what she had said. Her voice had been steady, which was worse than if it had been shaking. "I can't live inside your world. I can't keep watching you make the choices you make and pretend that it's normal. I'm going to build something different, something clean." I had not argued with her. That was the thing I had never told anyone. I had not argued not because I agreed with her, but because some part of me had looked at my daughter, standing in that lobby with her chin up and her eyes bright and her whole life ahead of her, and thought, maybe she's right. Maybe she deserves better than what I can offer. So I had let her go. I had let her walk out of my building and into the arms of a man named Preston Whitfield, whose background check had come back clean as a whistle, and I had not looked deeper because she had asked me not to, and because I had been trying for once in my life to respect a boundary she had drawn. The regret of that sat in my chest now, like a stone at the bottom of a cold river. "She asked me not to run a deeper check on him," I said out loud. Raymond did not look away from the road. "I know. I should have done it anyway." "Yes," Raymond said, "just that. No softening, no reassurance, no careful navigation around the truth. That was also why he had worked for me for 30 years. I let out a breath that fogged slightly in the cold air of the cabin. The heating system was working, but the temperature outside was dropping fast enough that it fought its way in through the seams. I looked down at my phone. The open line to the payphone was still active, still breathing, still there. "Savannah?" I said her name quietly, not sure if she could hear me. A rustling sound. Then, "I'm here, Daddy." Her voice was thinner than before, scraped raw by the cold and by whatever the last several hours had taken out of her. "Are you driving? We're on I-91. We're moving fast." "He came outside looking for me," she said, and the wobble in her voice sent a spike of something hot and furious straight through the center of my chest. "About 20 minutes ago. He walked right past the side of the building. I pressed myself against the wall, and he didn't see me. But, Daddy, the dogs are still out there. I can hear them in the trees." I pressed my back teeth together and breathed through my nose until the surge of rage settled into something I could use. "He's not going to find you," I said. "You stayed in the light the way I told you." "Yes." A sharp, wet sniff. "The man inside, his name is Doug. He gave me his jacket. He keeps checking on me through the window." Something loosened slightly in my chest at that. There were still decent people in the world. Not many in my experience, but enough. "Tell Doug I said thank you," I said. "And Savannah, I need you to tell me something." "What?" I chose the next words carefully, because she was standing alone in a snowstorm, with dogs hunting her in the dark, and I did not want to add to the weight of what she was carrying. But I needed to know. How long has this been going on? The pause that followed was not the pause of someone thinking about how to answer. It was the pause of someone deciding how much of the truth they could say out loud without falling apart completely. "A long time, Daddy." Her voice broke on the last word, cracking down the middle like green wood. "A really long time. I kept thinking it would get better. I kept thinking I could fix it. I kept thinking—" She stopped, drew a breath so shaky it rattled through the receiver. "I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I'm so sorry." The words hit me somewhere I did not have adequate armor for. "Don't you apologize to me." My voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped from somewhere deep in the throat. "Don't you dare apologize to me, Savannah. You hear me? None of this is on you." A sound came through the phone, then that I had not heard from my daughter since she was 9 years old and had fallen off her bicycle on the cobblestone path behind our old house in Connecticut. It was the sound of someone crying, who who had been holding it in so hard and for so long that the release of it was almost violent, great heaving sobs that she tried to muffle and couldn't her breath, coming in jagged, desperate pulls that tore at something ancient and irreplaceable inside me. I gripped the phone so tightly I felt the casing flex. "I've got you," I said. The words felt inadequate. They were inadequate, but they were the truest thing I knew how to say. "I'm coming. You're going to be all right. I promise you." Raymond said nothing, but his foot pressed the accelerator down another fraction of an inch, and the speedometer climbed past 95, and the snow-blurred highway opened up before us like a white tunnel leading toward whatever waited at the other end. 3 hours and 19 minutes later, the lights of Murphy's gas station on Route 9 appeared through the curtain of falling snow, a dim amber smear against the dark. And then I saw what was happening in that amber light, and every carefully constructed wall of composure I had built over 72 years of hard living developed a crack that I could feel in my teeth. Preston Whitfield had his hand in my daughter's hair. That was the first thing I saw when the headlights of our lead vehicle swept across the parking lot of Murphy's gas station. A tall man in an expensive wool overcoat, his fist twisted into Savannah's hair, dragging her toward a black Audi parked at the edge of the lot with its engine running. Savannah's feet were bare on the snow-covered asphalt. She was fighting him, her hands clawing at his wrist, her body twisting against his grip. But she was small and exhausted, and he was neither of those things. I had the door open before Raymond brought the SUV to a full stop. "Boss," Raymond started. "Stay on the vehicles," I said. "Nobody moves unless I say." The cold hit me like a wall. 14 degrees, the wind cutting straight through my coat and into the bones of my hands as I gripped my cane and walked toward them. Behind me, I heard the other two SUVs positioning their headlights flooding the lot with white light that threw long shadows across the snow. Preston Whitfield turned toward the light, raising his free hand to shield his eyes. He was handsome, in the way that expensive things are. Handsome, sharp jaw, perfect hair, the kind of face that photographed well and revealed nothing. He was also, I noted with professional detachment, holding my daughter by the hair with the practiced ease of a man who had done it before. Savannah saw me, her eyes red-rimmed, swollen, her left cheek darkening toward a bruise that made my vision go white at the edges found mine, across the parking lot, and what I saw in them was not relief. Not yet. It was the desperate, disbelieving look of someone who had stopped allowing themselves to hope and was now terrified to start again. "Who the hell are you?" Preston called out. His voice was sharp and authoritative, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He still had not released Savannah's hair. I kept walking. My cane struck the asphalt with each step steady and unhurried. Preston reached into his coat with his free hand and produced a folded document, holding it up like a shield. "I have a psychiatric emergency detention order signed by a licensed Vermont physician," he announced. "This woman is my wife. She has been certified as a danger to herself and others. If you interfere with me taking her to receive treatment, I will have every one of you arrested for obstruction and kidnapping before sunrise." A psychiatric emergency detention order. What Vermont law calls an emergency mental health warrant is a legal document that authorizes law enforcement to transport a person to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. It does not authorize a private citizen to drag his wife across a parking lot by her hair in a snowstorm. But Preston Whitfield was betting I did not know the difference, or that I would not care enough to argue. He was wrong on both counts. I stopped walking. I looked at the document, then I looked at Savannah. She met my eyes and shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. But I had been reading my daughter's face since the day she was born, and I understood it perfectly. The document was fraudulent, and Preston Whitfield had just made the last mistake of his comfortable life. "Sir," Preston said, his voice sharpening as I started walking again. "Sir, I am warning you. I will call the police right now, and I promise you that I was not listening to him anymore." I was looking at Savannah, at the bruise on her cheek, at her bare feet on the frozen asphalt, red and cracked and trembling, at the way her whole body was shaking, not just from the cold I realized, but from something deeper, something that had been building for a long time and had finally found its way to the surface. "Daddy!" Her voice broke completely on the word, not a whisper this time, but something raw and desperate that tore out of her chest like it had been trapped there for years. "Daddy, please!" I looked at Preston Whitfield's wrist, the one still tangled in my daughter's hair, and I made a very simple decision. I have broken many things in my life. Contracts, agreements, The occasional bone belonging to men who gave me no other option. I am not proud of most of it, but I will not apologize for what I did in that parking lot at 12:33 in the morning, with the snow coming down hard and my daughter's bare feet bleeding onto the asphalt, and a man in a cashmere overcoat holding her by the hair, like she was something he owned. I covered the last 10 feet between us in 3 strides. Preston saw me coming and opened his mouth, another threat, another legal citation, another carefully worded warning designed to make a reasonable man stop and reconsider. Preston Whitfield had built his entire life on the assumption that words were the most powerful weapons available, that the right document, the right tone of voice, the right display of authority could stop any situation from escalating beyond his control. He had never met a man like me. The head of my cane came down across his wrist with a single precise strike, not a wild swing, not a blow thrown in anger, but the kind of controlled, deliberate impact that comes from knowing exactly how much force is required to accomplish a specific outcome. The crack of it was sharp and clean, and swallowed almost immediately by the howling wind. Preston Whitfield screamed. It was not a dignified sound. It was high and shocked and naked with pain, the sound of a man who had never in his adult life experienced genuine physical consequence for his actions. His hand flew open. Savannah stumbled forward, freed, and I was already moving past him, already reaching for her, already positioning my body between her and the man, now doubled over on the asphalt, cradling his broken wrist against his chest. Savannah. Her name came out of me in a way I had not expected, rough and cracked at the edges every year of the last 5, compressed into 2 syllables. I pulled off my overcoat without thinking and draped it around her shaking shoulders, and the moment the wool settled over her, she made a sound that drove itself into the center of my chest like a blade, a single helpless sob that she tried to swallow and couldn't. She was so thin. That was the thing that hit me hardest, harder even than the bruise spreading across her cheekbone, or the blood on her feet, or the wild, exhausted terror in her eyes. She was so much thinner than I remembered, like something had been eating at her from the inside for a very long time. "I've got you," I said. My voice was doing something I was not entirely in control of. Raymond and one of the team members were already there, moving with the quiet efficiency of men who had done this kind of thing before. They took Savannah's weight gently between them, guiding her toward the warmth of the lead SUV, with a care that I knew Raymond would never have shown for anyone else on earth. She let them. She leaned into Raymond's arm and let herself be guided, and I saw her legs buckle once, just once, her knees giving out from cold and exhaustion and relief, before Raymond caught her and steadied her with a murmured, "I've got you, Miss Savannah," that surprised me with its gentleness. Behind me, Preston was pulling himself upright. "That is assault," he said, his voice shaking with pain and fury, his expensive overcoat smeared with wet snow, where he had gone down on one knee. "That is aggravated assault with a weapon. I have witnesses, I have documentation. I will have you in federal prison before this week is out. Old man, do you understand me? That woman is my wife. She is mentally incompetent, and you have just... Doug." I raised my voice toward the gas station without turning around. The door of Murphy's Gas and Convenience cracked open. The station attendant, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a weathered face and the careful eyes of someone who had seen enough of life not to be easily surprised, looked out at the parking lot. "Yes, sir. Did you see anyone assault anyone out here tonight?" Doug looked at the parking lot, at the 3 black SUVs, at Preston holding his wrist and shaking with rage, at Savannah being helped into the warm vehicle wrapped in my coat, her feet finally off the frozen ground. "No, sir," Doug said. "Can't say that I did. Visibility's terrible out here. Storm and all." He went back inside and closed the door. Preston stared at me. His face had gone the particular color of a man who is beginning to understand for the first time that the situation he is in does not have a version where he wins. The confidence that had been radiating off him in waves since our headlights first hit. The parking lot was curdling at the edges, turning into something uglier and more desperate. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said. His voice cracked on the last word, and he hated himself for it. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. I looked at him for a moment. Just a moment. "No," I said quietly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I turned and walked to the SUV. The moment I climbed in and pulled the door shut, the noise and cold of the outside world vanished behind 3 inches of armored glass. The interior was warm and quiet and smelled of leather and the faint chemical scent of the heating system working hard. Savannah was in the back seat. Raymond's team member had found a thermal blanket from the emergency kit and wrapped it around her legs, and she was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face since she was a very small girl, open and unguarded and raw, with something that might in time become relief. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered. My throat closed entirely. 2 words. 5 years of silence, and 2 words, and the whole carefully constructed architecture of my composure developed a fracture I could feel from the inside. "Hi, sweetheart," I managed. Behind us in the snow-covered parking lot, Preston Whitfield was still screaming. His voice faded as Raymond pulled out onto Route 9 and pointed us south toward the highway, toward Manhattan, toward home. By the time we reached the on-ramp, I could not hear him anymore. She said, "Hi, Daddy," and then she did not say anything else for a long time. Not because she had nothing to say. I could see it in her face. The words were there, crowding behind her eyes, pressing against the inside of her chest, like something that had been locked in a small space for far too long. But her body was making decisions her mind had not authorized. Her eyelids kept dropping and snapping back open. Her hands folded in her lap, beneath the thermal blanket, trembled with a rhythm that had nothing to do with the temperature inside the vehicle. The heating system was running full blast. She should have been warm by now. She was not warm. I watched her the way I had watched dangerous situations for 50 years, quietly, completely cataloging every detail, without letting my expression betray what I was finding. And what I was finding made the back of my neck go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the Vermont winter outside. Her pupils were wrong. I leaned forward slightly in my seat, angling toward her, and clicked on the small reading light above the window. The beam caught her eyes directly. Her pupils contracted, but slowly. Too slowly. A healthy response takes milliseconds. Hers took nearly a full second, sluggish and reluctant, like a machine running on insufficient power. "Savannah?" I kept my voice gentle. "Look at me." She turned her head toward me, and the effort seemed to cost her something. Her eyes found mine, but there was a lag to it, a fraction of a second, where her gaze drifted before it landed. Her lips were cracked and dry, despite the moisture in the air, and the skin on her forearms, where the thermal blanket had slipped, was mottled with a faint bluish undertone that was not bruising. My stomach dropped 8 floors. "How long have you been taking medication?" I asked, carefully, calmly. Like the answer did not matter when it was the only thing in the world that mattered to me in that moment. Savannah's brow furrowed. "I don't... Preston gives me vitamins. In the morning. He's always given me..." She stopped. Something moved across her face, not quite realization, but the shadow of it. The shape of something terrible beginning to take form just beneath the surface of her understanding. Her chin started to tremble. "Daddy, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel like..." "You're going to be fine," I said, and reached across to take her hand. Her fingers were ice cold even through the blanket, and they gripped mine with a strength that surprised me, desperate and tight, like a child grabbing hold of something solid in the dark. "I promise you, but I need to make a call." I dialed with my free hand. It rang twice. "Walter." Dr. Gerald Sutton's voice was the voice of a man who had been woken from sleep and was professionally pretending otherwise. Gerald had been my private physician for 20 years, a former Johns Hopkins trauma surgeon who had made certain life choices that aligned his career path with mine. He did not ask unnecessary questions. It was his finest quality. "I'm bringing my daughter in," I said. "I need a full toxicology screen, neurological panel. I need you to check for long-term antipsychotic exposure, specifically haloperidol, and benzodiazepines." A pause. When Gerald spoke again, his voice had sharpened into something clinical and precise. "How is she presenting?" "Delayed pupil response, extremity tremors, cognitive lag, dry mucous membranes." "Duration of exposure?" "Unknown, possibly extended." I looked at Savannah. She was watching me with eyes that were wide and frightened, and beginning to fill with tears that spilled over before she could stop them running silently down her bruised cheek and dropping off her jaw onto the thermal blanket. "Prepare the medical suite. We'll be there in under 3 hours." "I'll be ready," Gerald said, and hung up. Savannah was crying openly now, not the heaving sobs from the phone call, but something quieter and more devastating, tears streaming steadily down her face, while her free hand pressed against her mouth, as if she could hold the rest of it in. He was putting something in my vitamins, she said. Her voice shook so badly the words came out, fractured each one in effort. Wasn't he? That's what you think. I did not lie to her. She had earned the truth. That's what I think, I said. A sound came out of her then sharp and wounded, like something had just struck her in the chest. Her whole body curled forward, shoulders rounding head, dropping, and she cried the way people cry when they realize that the person who was supposed to love them most was the one hurting them worst. Deep wrenching sobs that shook her from the inside out. I kept hold of her hand. I did not let go. Not for a single second of the 3 hours it took us to get home. Dr. Gerald Sutton told me to go sleep on the first night. Walter, he said, standing in the doorway of the medical suite with a blood draw kit in one hand, and the particular expression of a man who has learned to choose his battles carefully. You are 72 years old. You have a heart that runs on spite and stubbornness and not much else. Go sleep. Write that in my chart, I told him, and pulled my chair closer to Savannah's bed. Gerald muttered something under his breath that I chose not to hear and went back to work. The medical suite on the 38th floor was not the kind of room that appeared in any building directory. It had been built into the eastern corner of the penthouse 12 years ago, equipped with everything Gerald had told me to acquire: monitors, a portable dialysis unit, a pharmaceutical cabinet that would have made a small hospital envious. I had built it for contingencies. I had never imagined this particular one. Savannah crashed hard within an hour of arriving. Not sleep something more violent than sleep. Her body, deprived of the chemicals it had been force-fed for 18 months, began to revolt in earnest. The first seizure hit at 4 in the morning, and the sound of it, the sudden terrible rigidity of her body, the way her back arched off the mattress, drove itself into my memory, in a place where it will stay until I die. I grabbed her hands. Gerald moved fast, efficient, calling out instructions to himself in the clipped shorthand of a man who had worked trauma rooms and did not panic. He administered the anticonvulsant. The seizure passed. Savannah went limp against the mattress, her chest heaving, her face sheened with sweat. Again, Gerald said quietly, resetting the IV line. There will be more tonight. He was right. There were 3 more before dawn. I held her hands through every one of them. I am not a man who prays. I have done too many things in my life that have put me on the wrong side of that particular conversation. But in that room, in the dark hours between midnight and morning, with my daughter's body fighting a war that someone else had started inside her, I made whatever private bargain I was capable of making and offered everything I had left in exchange for her getting through it. The second day was worse in different ways. The seizures eased, but the hallucinations came. Savannah would surface from a half-conscious state and speak to people who were not there, her eyes tracking movements that existed only inside her damaged nervous system. Once she sat straight up in bed and screamed Preston's name so loudly that Raymond knocked on the suite door from the hallway to check if we needed assistance. We're fine. I called out, though. We were not fine. Then near the end of the second night, Savannah's voice came out of the dark in a different register, entirely small and lost and heartbreaking. Mama, she whispered. Mama, are you here, Dorothy? The name hit me like a physical blow, not in my chest this time, but somewhere higher, somewhere behind the eyes, hot and sudden. I pressed my free hand over my mouth and breathed through it. Gerald looked up from the monitor across the room, caught my expression, and looked back down at his equipment without a word. He was a good doctor. He understood which wounds were outside his specialty. She's here, I said to Savannah, because it was the only thing I could give her in that moment that was worth anything at all. She's right here, sweetheart. Savannah's face relaxed. Her grip on my hand loosened slightly and she drifted back under. I sat in that chair until morning came gray and thin through the edges of the blackout curtains. My back ached. My hands were stiff. I was, as Gerald had accurately noted, 72 years old and running on spite. On the morning of the 4th day, Gerald looked at the monitor readings for a long time. Then he looked at me. The worst of it is over, he said. Her system is clearing. Another 24 hours and she should be coherent. I nodded. Something behind my sternum released not all at once, but in increments, like a fist slowly opening. Go sleep, Walter, Gerald said again. When she wakes up, I said. Gerald picked up his clipboard, shook his head, and did not argue. She opened her eyes at 7:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was looking at my watch when it happened, not because I am a man who tracks minutes obsessively, but because I had been tracking them for 72 hours straight, and the habit had carved itself into me. 7:14. The gray November light was just beginning to push through the edges of the blackout curtains, thin and pale and tentative, like it was not entirely sure it was welcome. Savannah blinked. Once. Twice. Her eyes moved slowly around the room, the monitors, the IV line taped to the inside of her arm, the pharmaceutical cabinet along the far wall, the ceiling she did not recognize. Then they found me. I was sitting in the same chair I had occupied for 3 days. I had not shaved. My shirt was the same one I had been wearing since Vermont. I was by any objective measure a wreck, but I was there. I was present and upright and looking directly at her, and whatever she saw in my face when our eyes met made hers fill up immediately, tears welling fast and spilling over before she could do a single thing about it. "Daddy!" Her voice came out rough and cracked, scraped raw from the screaming she did not remember doing. She reached out her hand, the one without the IV, and stretched it toward me with the urgency of someone grabbing for a lifeline in open water. I was out of the chair before she finished saying the word. I took her hand in both of mine and held on. And Savannah Harmon, my daughter, 34 years old, who had spent the last 5 years building a life specifically designed to need nothing from me, burst into tears with a force that shook her entire body. She cried the way she had not let herself cry on the phone, or in the parking lot, or on the drive back, or in any of the terrible hours since. She cried like something that had been sealed under tremendous pressure had finally irrevocably given way. I pulled my chair to the edge of the bed and sat close enough that she could feel the warmth of me, and I held her hand and said nothing useful because there was nothing useful to say, and I let her cry until she was empty. It took a while. When she finally surfaced, her face was blotched and swollen, and her breathing was still hitching in the aftermath, but her eyes were clear in a way they had not been since I first saw her in that parking lot. Present, focused, hers. She looked at me for a long moment, really looked the way you look at someone when you have been afraid you might not get the chance again. And then she said, with a watery half-laugh that surprised both of us, "You look terrible, Daddy." Something cracked open in my chest that had been sealed for 5 years. I laughed a real laugh, short and rusty from disuse, like a door swinging open on hinges that had not moved in a long time. "You're not exactly at your best either, sweetheart," I said. She laughed again, and then winced because laughing hurt, and then laughed anyway. Her free hand came up to press against her ribs, and her eyes scrunched up, and for just a moment, she looked exactly the way she had looked at 9 years old, laughing at something her mother had said at the dinner table in our old house in Connecticut. And the joy and the grief of that hit me simultaneously in a combination I was not prepared for. I cleared my throat, looked at the monitor, looked back at her. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Like I've been run over by something large." She shifted against the pillows, grimacing, taking inventory of herself. "My head hurts. My arms hurt. She stopped, looked at the IV, then looked at me with eyes that had gone serious and careful. "How bad was it, the withdrawal?" "Bad enough," I said. "Gerald managed it. You're through the worst." "How long was I?" 3 days. She absorbed that. Her jaw tightened, and I saw the tears threatening to come back, not the relieved ones from before, but something harder and angrier beginning to surface underneath. She pressed her lips together and fought it down with a visible effort, her chin trembling with the strain of it. "He put something in my vitamins," she said. Not a question, confirmation. Saying it out loud for the first time, while fully conscious, letting it be real in a way she had not let it be before. Yes. I did not soften it. "For how long?" "Gerald estimates 18 months, possibly longer." Savannah closed her eyes. A single tear escaped from the corner of her right eye and ran down her temple and into her hair. Her hand tightened on mine until I could feel the bones of her fingers pressing hard against my palm, and I let her squeeze as hard as she needed to, because that was in that moment the only useful thing I had to offer. "I didn't call you sooner," she said, her voice breaking apart on the words, "because I was ashamed. I was so ashamed, Daddy. I left you because I thought your world was dangerous, and then I walked straight into something so much worse, and I couldn't stand the thought of you knowing that I had been so wrong. I kept thinking I could fix it myself. I kept thinking, stop." I said it quietly but firmly, the way you stop someone from walking towards something that will hurt them. She opened her eyes and looked at me, and I held her gaze and meant every word of what came next. You survived, Savannah. You held on and you got yourself to that payphone and you called. That is not failure. That is the bravest thing I have ever seen. She started crying again. She could not seem to help it, and I could not blame her. But this time she was also nodding her head, moving in small, desperate affirmatives, like she was trying to let the words in through sheer physical effort. I need to tell you something, she said, when she could speak again. Her voice had steadied, finding a new floor beneath itself. Something had shifted in her expression, the raw, open grief pulling back to reveal something harder and more purposeful underneath. About the safe, Preston's safe, Daddy, I found things in it and I need you to know what I found because I think, she swallowed, took a breath. I think it's about Mom. The room went very still. I looked at my daughter's face at the certainty in it and the fear and the fury beginning to kindle beneath both, and I felt something shift inside me too. Something cold and old and patient waking up. Tell me, I said. Before I reveal what Savannah found inside that safe something that changed everything, including what I thought I knew about my own wife's death, I need to know you're still with me. Drop a 8 in the comments right now. That's all, just an 8. It tells me you're here, and it means more to me than you know. A note, before we continue the story ahead, contains some fictionalized elements crafted for narrative and educational purposes. If that's not something you're comfortable with, this is a good place to step away, no hard feelings. She told me about the safe in the careful, measured way of someone who has rehearsed the words so many times in their head that saying them out loud feels both necessary and terrifying. 3 weeks before the night at the gas station, Preston had left for Boston on a 2-day consulting trip. Savannah had been alone in the Whitfield estate, 8 bedrooms, a 4-car garage, and a silence so complete it had its own weight. She had gone into his study on the 2nd floor to look for the checkbook, because Preston controlled every financial account they shared, and she needed to pay the housekeeper in cash, and the housekeeper was the only person who spoke to her like a human being on most days. The painting behind Preston's desk was slightly crooked. It was a small thing, the kind of thing a person might not notice unless they were the one who straightened it every week, which Savannah was. Because Preston did not tolerate asymmetry, and Savannah had learned to anticipate his irritations before they became her consequences. She straightened it automatically and felt it swing outward on a concealed hinge rather than shifting flush against the wall. The safe behind it was open. Preston, in his arrogance, had not locked it when he left. He had not locked it because he had never imagined Savannah would have a reason to look behind that painting, because he had spent 3 years making sure she did not have reasons to look at anything too closely. I almost closed it, Savannah told me, her voice dropping to something barely above a murmur. I almost just straightened the painting and walked away. I don't know why I didn't. Something told me to look. What she found inside the safe, she described to me in a sequence that felt almost clinical in its precision, like she was reading from a document she had memorized, a manila folder containing Dorothy's medical records. Not the records from Dorothy's regular physician, but records from a private clinic in Burlington that Savannah had never heard of. Prescriptions, billing statements. 2 years of them spanning the period from Dorothy's first symptoms to her death. And at the bottom of the folder, folded in half and held with a paper clip, a single sheet of notepaper in Preston's handwriting. Savannah described it to me, line by line. It was a timeline, dates in the left margin, notations in the right. The first entry was dated 14 months before Dorothy's death. The last was dated 11 days before it. The notations were brief and functional dosage adjustments, observed responses, a note about be confirming supply that Savannah had not understood until she reached the bottom of the page and saw 2 signatures. Preston Whitfield. And beneath his, in a hand, I recognized from the single Christmas card she had sent, the year Savannah and Preston married Beverly Whitfield. When Savannah finished describing that page, she stopped talking. Her hand had found mine again at some point during the telling, and she was gripping it with both of hers now, her knuckles pale with the pressure of it, her eyes fixed on the middle distance with the look of someone staring at something they cannot stop seeing. He killed her, Savannah said. Her voice was flat and strange, stripped of inflection the way voices get when emotion has burned everything else away. Him and his mother. They killed my mother. And then he married me and started doing the same thing to me. And I didn't even know Daddy. I was living in that house and eating his dinners, and I didn't even know. Her face crumpled. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and made a sound that I will carry with me for whatever years I have left. A high, wounded sound, like something tearing that was not meant to tear. And then she was crying again, harder than before, her whole body shaking with the grief and the rage and the horror of it all arriving at once. I did not tell her to stop. I did not tell her it was going to be all right, because some things are not all right, and pretending otherwise is an insult to the person who lived through them. I sat on the edge of her bed, and I put my arm around her shaking shoulders, and I held on while she fell apart, and I stared at the wall above the pharmaceutical cabinet, and I breathed through what I was feeling, the way a man breathes through the moment before he does something that cannot be undone. When she finally quieted, she pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were swollen nearly shut, her face red and raw, and there was a fierceness in her expression that reminded me painfully and precisely of the woman who had raised her. "The phone," she said, suddenly urgent. "Daddy, I took pictures before he came back. I used my old phone, the backup one I kept in my nightstand that he didn't know about. And I photographed everything in that folder, every page. I had it on me when I ran. It's still..." She reached up and touched the neckline of her hospital gown, her eyes widening with something close to panic. "Raymond has it," I said. "He took it from your things when we arrived. It's in the safe in my office. The photographs are intact." The breath that left her body then was the longest, most complete exhale I had ever heard from another human being. Her shoulders dropped 2 inches, her hands unclenched. She pressed both palms flat against her thighs and breathed in and out, steadying herself. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked at my daughter, at the bruise on her cheek that was fading now to yellow at the edges, at the IV still taped to her arm, at the terrible, hard-won clarity in her eyes, and I felt something settle into place inside me with the quiet finality of a lock engaging. "Everything," I said. That evening, Raymond brought me a document I had been expecting. Preston Whitfield had filed an emergency guardianship petition in Vermont Family Court the morning after the gas station. He was not running. He was not hiding. He was fighting back on legal ground with the confidence of a man who believed the law was something he could purchase and deploy like any other tool. He was not wrong about the law being purchasable. He was wrong about who had been purchasing it longer. I asked her how she got from the house to the gas station. She had walked me through the safe, through the documents, through the moment. Preston's headlights swept up the driveway 2 hours earlier than expected, and she shoved the old phone into the waistband of her jeans and closed the safe and straightened the painting with hands that were shaking so hard she nearly knocked it crooked again. She had walked me through the look on Preston's face when he came into the study and found her standing there, the split second of calculation behind his eyes before the charm snapped back into place like a mask being fitted, and she had walked me through what happened after when he found the old phone. But she had not told me how she got out of the house. "How?" I asked. "From the attic room to the gas station. Tell me how." Savannah pulled in a long breath. She looked down at our joined hands for a moment, then back up at me, and something in her expression went very still and very deliberate, the look of a person deciding to say a difficult thing, plainly rather than softening it into something easier to hear. "He hit me," she said, "when he found the phone. He hit me hard enough that I went down, and then he dragged me upstairs by my arm and locked me in the attic room and told me that if I made any noise, he would make sure I never left that house coherent." She said it the way you report a fact temperature distance elevation, and the very flatness of it made my vision go white at the edges in a way that the sight of Preston in that parking lot had not quite managed. "He took my shoes. He took my regular phone. He didn't know about the old one because I'd shoved it inside my bra when I fell." "Smart girl," I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "I waited 4 hours," she continued, "until the house went quiet, until I couldn't hear him moving around downstairs anymore." She looked at the window across the room, at the thin line of gray city light along the bottom of the curtain, like she was seeing something else entirely. "The attic room has one window. It's small, maybe 18 inches wide, but it looks out over the back roof, the second floor roof. It slopes down, and there was snow on it, maybe 8 inches of fresh powder, and I thought..." She almost smiled. Almost. "I thought snow is soft. Snow slows things down. So I used a piece of the mirror that had cracked off the frame on the wall. I'd been working at it for an hour to get the window latch open, and I went out feet first." She showed me her palms, then turned them over so I could see the faint scarring along the heel of each hand, where she had gripped the window frame on the way out. I looked at them for exactly as long as I needed to in order to collect myself, and then I looked back at her face. "The snow caught me," she said. I slid down the roof and dropped off the edge of the second floor onto the back lawn, maybe 8-10 feet. I twisted my knee when I landed, but it held. And then the alarm went off. She described what came next with the same careful precision, the lights flooding on throughout the house, every window going bright at once, the alarm shrieking into the night air. She ran for the tree line before the first door opened. She heard Preston's voice behind her, calling her name, the way he called it when the doors were locked, not loud, not panicked, but low and specific and absolutely certain of itself. And she ran harder. The dogs came out of the kennel on the north side of the property 2 minutes later. She heard them. Before she heard the handlers, a deep urgent baying that bounced off the tree trunks and made the dark feel smaller. She was already in the pines by then, the snow coming up past her ankles with every step, her bare feet going from painful to numb, so fast it frightened her. "There's a creek," she said, "about a quarter mile into the property. It runs east toward the road. In November, it's not fully frozen. There are patches of open water between the ice sheets." She met my eyes. "I read somewhere that dogs lose the scent trail in water, so I went in." She said it simply, like a woman reporting the weather. She went into a Vermont creek in November, in the dark in her bare feet, with dogs 40 yards behind her, and the temperature somewhere around 12 degrees Fahrenheit. I pressed my free hand flat against my knee and breathed. "How long were you in the water?" I asked. "Long enough." She glanced down. "I couldn't feel my feet when I came out. I couldn't feel them for most of the walk after that either. I just kept moving toward the road because stopping wasn't something I could afford to think about." She paused. The lights from their flashlights swept over me twice in the trees. I went flat in the snow both times, and they passed. A breath. It took about 40 minutes to reach Route 9. The gas station was another 10 minutes east. Doug let me use the payphone. She stopped. The room held the weight of what she had just described, 3 miles in the dark and the cold and the snow hunted alone, with no shoes and no coat and nothing between her and the night, but the particular kind of stubbornness that does not announce itself but simply refuses to stop. I stood up. I said, "Excuse me a moment." I walked out of the medical suite and into the hallway, and stood there with my back against the wall and my eyes on the ceiling and my hands pressed flat against the wallpaper on either side of me. And I stayed like that for 3 minutes while I did whatever it is that men like me do, instead of the thing that is actually happening inside them. Then I went back in. Savannah looked at me. When I entered, searched my face with the careful, practiced eye of a woman who had spent years reading the temperature of a room and a man's expression for signs of incoming weather. Whatever she saw in mine made her reach out her hand again, and I took it and sat back down in my chair. "Raymond," I said. He appeared in the doorway within seconds. 30 years. "No more patience," I told him. Raymond looked at me for one moment. Then he nodded, pulled the door closed behind him, and I heard his footsteps move quickly down the hallway toward the elevator. Preston Whitfield filed for emergency guardianship on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, I had read every page of his legal strategy. By Wednesday afternoon, I had found every hole in it. By Wednesday evening, I had begun filling those holes with concrete, and I had started making phone calls that Preston Whitfield, sitting in his rented suite at the Mandarin Oriental with his broken wrist in a fiberglass cast, and his legal team on speed dial, did not know were being made. The first call was to Daniel Forsyth. Daniel had been my attorney for 23 years, a former federal prosecutor from the Southern District of New York who had crossed the aisle at 50 and never looked back. He was 61 now, with the lean, unhurried manner of a man who had seen every variety of human catastrophe and had stopped being surprised by any of them. He arrived at the penthouse at 7 in the morning, with a leather briefcase and a container of black coffee, sat down across from me at the oak table, and read through Preston's filing without a word. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "He's good," Daniel said. "The psychiatric evaluation is thorough. The witness statements are credible on paper. If this goes through Vermont Family Court, the way he's structured it, he has a reasonable shot." "It's not going through Vermont Family Court," I said. Daniel tilted his head. "On what grounds do we move it?" "Savannah is a permanent resident of New York. Preston maintains his primary practice in Massachusetts. The dispute involves a trust fund valued at $30 million, which puts it well above the $75,000 threshold for diversity jurisdiction. I set my own coffee down. We file a counterpetition in the Southern District of New York. Federal jurisdiction supersedes Vermont family court. Preston's filing gets tied up in a jurisdictional dispute while we build our case. Daniel looked at me for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating his estimate of a situation. The FBI is already involved regarding the poisoning. Gerald Sutton's forensic report will be complete by Friday. 18 months of documented haloperidol and benzodiazepine exposure administered without prescription or consent. Under Vermont statutes, Title 13, Section 1021, that is criminal poisoning carrying up to 15 years. I folded my hands on the table. Once the federal criminal investigation is formally opened, the family court petition becomes moot. A man under federal indictment for criminal poisoning does not get awarded guardianship over the woman he poisoned. Daniel wrote something in his notepad. Then he wrote something else. Then he looked up. "The photographs from the safe," he said. "Chain of custody. Raymond secured the device the night we arrived. It has not left the safe in my office. Gerald's technician extracted the images under documented conditions. Every photograph is time-stamped and geotagged to the Whitfield estate." I paused. The handwriting on the timeline document can be forensically matched to Preston's hand. We have 5 years of signed contracts and correspondence for comparison. And Beverly Whitfield's signature on the same document? Yes. Daniel tapped his pen against the notepad twice. It was the closest he came to expressing satisfaction. That's conspiracy, minimum. Potentially felony murder, if the DA wants to push the Dorothy Harmon death to the surface. "He will," I said. "I intend to give him every reason to." We worked through the morning. Raymond brought in more coffee and a tray of food that neither of us touched. By noon, the counterpetition was drafted and ready to file. By 2 in the afternoon, it had been submitted to the clerk's office at the Daniel Patrick Moynihan United States Courthouse on Pearl Street, and the jurisdictional clock had started running. I went to check on Savannah at 3. She was sitting up in bed with the color returning slowly to her face and a legal pad on her knees writing something in the careful, deliberate hand she had inherited from her mother. She looked up when I came in, and her eyes went immediately to my face the way they always did now, reading me checking the temperature, an old survival habit that I hoped in time she would be able to unlearn. "How bad is it?" she asked. "It was bad," I said, sitting down across from her. "It's becoming less bad by the hour." He filed the guardianship petition. It wasn't a question. She had heard enough through the wall of the medical suite to understand the shape of what was happening. He did. We've moved the jurisdiction to federal court in Manhattan. It will take his legal team several days to respond and realign. We have a window. I looked at her notepad. "What are you writing?" Savannah looked down at the pad. Her jaw tightened slightly. "Everything I remember. About the safe, about the documents, about the timeline, about the 2 years before my mother died." She looked back up at me, and her eyes were dry and burning with something that was not grief anymore, but had come through grief and out the other side into something considerably more useful. "You're going to need a witness, Daddy. I'm going to be ready to be one." Something moved through my chest, then that I did not have an adequate word for. Pride was part of it. Grief was part of it. The specific aching tenderness of watching someone you love decide to be harder than the thing that tried to break them. "I know you will," I said. I stood to go. At the door, Savannah's voice stopped me. "Daddy." I turned. She was looking at me steadily, the legal pad still in her lap, her pen held loosely in her fingers. "He has a mother, Beverly. She signed that document too." "I know," I said. "She's not going to let him go down alone. She's going to protect herself." I looked at my daughter, at the sharp, clear intelligence working behind her eyes, at the woman she was becoming on the other side of what had been done to her, and I felt something settle into the back of my mind with the quiet, certain click of a key turning in a lock. "No," I agreed. "She's not. And that is going to be the most useful thing about her. I have started wars with less than a phone call. What I did to Beverly Whitfield required only a conversation, a document that did not exist, and a precise understanding of the specific fear that had been living rent-free in her chest for the better part of a decade. I did not invent that fear. I did not manufacture it from nothing. I simply found it the way you find a hairline fracture in a load-bearing wall and applied exactly the right amount of pressure at exactly the right point. Beverly Whitfield was 64 years old and had not held a paying job since 1987. Everything she owned, the Beacon Hill townhouse, the summer place on the Cape, the accounts, the memberships, the particular brand of old money respectability that she wore, like a second skin, existed because of money that had passed through her son's hands first. Preston had structured it that way deliberately. I understood that now, reading through the financial records Raymond had assembled overnight. Preston controlled Beverly's access to every significant asset they shared. He had been doing it quietly for years, the same way he had done everything with patience and with paperwork, and with the absolute confidence of a man who believed he was the smartest person in any room he entered. What that meant, practically speaking, was that Beverly Whitfield was terrified of being left behind. She had never said so to anyone as far as I could determine. She did not need to. The fear was written into the architecture of her choices, the way she had followed her son's instructions without question, the way she had signed documents she should have refused, the way she had convinced herself that loyalty was protection. She had made herself indispensable to Preston's plan because she believed that made her safe. She was wrong, but she did not know she was wrong yet. Raymond created the document on a Thursday. It was a draft agreement, 8 pages formatted correctly, bearing Preston's signature above a clause that transferred his primary financial holdings into a trust structured around the interests of a third party, whose name appeared 3 times in the body of the text. The name was fictional. The document was fictional, but it was constructed with the kind of attention to detail that makes fictional things feel undeniably real, and Raymond had it placed in the hands of Beverly's personal attorney through a source that Beverly's attorney would have no reason to question. By Friday afternoon, Beverly had made 4 phone calls to Preston. I knew this because Raymond had arranged to know it. Preston took none of them. He was occupied with his legal team rebuilding his strategy in the wake of the jurisdictional transfer to federal court, and his mother calling repeatedly was, I imagined, something he filed under manageable nuisances rather than warning signs. That was his second significant mistake of the week. By Saturday morning, Beverly had called her own attorney, twice her accountant once, and a woman in Providence whose connection to Beverly's past I found interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. The calls were all variations on the same theme. Is this real? What does this mean? What do I do? Raymond reported this to me over coffee on Saturday afternoon. He sat across the table in the kitchen, not the formal dining room, the kitchen which was the room we had always used when it was just the 2 of us, and the conversation was the kind that did not require furniture, and laid it out with his customary economy of words. She's scared, Raymond said. Really scared, not performing scared. The accountant call lasted 40 minutes. She went through every joint holding line by line. Good, I said. She's going to reach out. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Probably through an intermediary. She won't contact you directly. Not yet. I know. I set my cup down. When she does, I want it arranged at the restaurant. Private room. No staff inside during the meeting. And Raymond? He looked up. I need the FBI contact at the field office on 6th Avenue, the one who's been patient about the Harmon logistics matter. Raymond's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A reassessment, a recalibration. The particular look of a man who has just understood that the game is larger than he thought. You're going to bring them in. I've been in conversation with the DOJ for 18 months, I said. It was always going to come to a head. I would rather it come to a head on my schedule, on my terms, in service of something that matters. I looked at him steadily. Beverly Whitfield is going to walk into that restaurant carrying evidence that will put her son in federal prison. I want that evidence to go directly into the right hands with an unbroken chain of custody in a manner that no defense attorney on earth will be able to challenge. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the November sky had gone the flat, featureless gray of a city that has run out of weather ideas and settled on cold. You've been planning this for a while, he said. It was not quite an accusation. It was not quite a question. I've been planning for contingencies, I said. That's different. He nodded slowly, finished his coffee, set the cup down with the precise, unhurried movement of a man who has made peace with the fact that his employer is always going to be 3 moves ahead of the conversation. I'll make the call, Raymond said. Make two, I told him. One to the FBI, one to the kitchen at the restaurant. I want the private room available Thursday. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. At the doorway, he paused his hand on the frame and looked back at me with an expression I had not seen on Raymond Cole's face in a very long time, something that might on a less controlled man have looked like admiration. "Walter," he said, "for what it's worth, she'd have been proud of you." He meant Dorothy. He knew I knew he meant Dorothy. He did not wait for me to respond, which was, as always, exactly the right call. His footsteps moved down the hallway, and I sat alone in the kitchen with my cooling coffee and the gray November light and the particular hollow warmth of doing the right thing 12 years too late. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and went to check on my daughter. The following Thursday, a week after Raymond planted the document, Beverly Whitfield walked into my restaurant. She wore a Chanel suit the color of winter fog and carried a Louis Vuitton bag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. And she smiled when she walked into the private dining room, like a woman who believed she was about to conduct the most important negotiation of her life. She was right about the negotiation. She was wrong about who was conducting it. I counted 4 tells in the first 30 seconds, the way her eyes swept the room before they settled on me, checking exits, checking for company. The involuntary threat assessment of a person who has something to hide and knows it. The way she gripped the strap of her bag 2 inches higher than was comfortable, her knuckles not quite white but working toward it. The fractional hesitation before her smile reached its full extension like a machine that needed a moment to warm up. And the shoes impeccable expensive with a very faint scuff on the inner heel of the left one that told me she had been pacing. Beverly Whitfield was terrified. She was simply very good at wearing it like composure. "Mr. Harmon," she extended her hand across the table with the practiced grace of a woman who had been shaking hands at charity galas since before I owned my first building. Her grip was firm, dry. She had prepared for this. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Sit down, Beverly," I said. "We both know why you're here." Something flickered behind her eyes, a flash of something raw that she covered immediately with a small, controlled laugh. "Straight to business. I appreciate that." She sat, arranged the bag on the chair beside her, and folded her hands on the table in a gesture of composed authority that might have fooled someone who hadn't spent 50 years reading People for Survival. "I understand you have an interest in resolving the current situation regarding my son and your daughter." "I have an interest in justice," I said. "The situation will resolve itself as a consequence." She did not like that. Her jaw tightened by a fraction. "I have information," she said. "Specific documented information regarding certain events that occurred over the past several years. Information that could significantly advance your position with respect to the federal investigation." She reached into the Louis Vuitton bag and placed a flash drive on the table between us. It was a small thing, matte black, no larger than my thumb, and it sat on the white tablecloth with the particular weight of something that contained a great deal of ruin. Email correspondence between myself and my son, spanning approximately 3 years. The content is thorough. I looked at the flash drive. I did not touch it. "And what do you want in return?" I asked. Beverly held my gaze with an effort that was almost admirable. $5 million deposited to an account I will specify at the time of transfer, and assistance with certain travel arrangements. I have a destination in mind, South America. I would need documentation to support a new identity, which I understand is within your capacity to arrange." She paused. "I want to disappear, Mr. Harmon, cleanly and permanently. In exchange, you get everything you need to put my son in prison for the rest of his natural life." I let the silence sit for a moment, not because I needed to think, but because I had learned long ago that silence makes people anxious, and anxious people talk, and talking. People reveal things they had intended to keep back. Beverly revealed 3 things in the next 40 seconds. She revealed that she had already identified her preferred airline and departure terminal, which told me the travel arrangements were not hypothetical. She revealed that she was not in fact certain the documentation could be arranged, which told me she was bluffing about the breadth of her intelligence regarding my capabilities. And she revealed in the particular way she kept not looking at the flash drive that she was afraid of it, afraid of what it contained, afraid of what handing it over meant, afraid that she was in this moment doing something that could not be undone. She was right to be afraid. She was just afraid of the wrong thing. "Raymond," I said. Raymond came in from the side entrance carrying a briefcase which he set on the table beside me without a word and left. Beverly watched this with the carefully neutral expression of a woman pretending she was not relieved to see the money. I opened the briefcase, let her look at it, then I closed it. "I have one condition," I said. Beverly's chin lifted slightly. "Which is, the drive goes into evidence custody tonight, not to me. Directly to the federal agents who will be receiving it as part of an ongoing investigation." I held her gaze steadily. "A proper chain of custody ensures that everything on that drive is usable in court. It protects your agreement, it protects the investigation, and it means that no defense attorney can argue the evidence was tampered with between your hands and the prosecutors." I paused. "Is that acceptable?" Beverly looked at me for a long moment. Behind her eyes, I watched her run the calculation, weighing what she understood against what she did not, measuring the angles she could see against the angles she couldn't. She was intelligent. She had always been intelligent. It was simply that her intelligence had spent 64 years in service of the wrong things. "That's acceptable," she said. She pushed the flash drive across the tablecloth toward me. I picked it up for the first and last time and placed it directly into the evidence bag that Raymond had left on the chair beside me, already labeled, already tagged, already part of a chain of custody that had begun the moment 2 FBI agents in plain clothes had signed in at the restaurant's service entrance 40 minutes before Beverly arrived. We shook hands across the table. Hers was still dry, still firm, still performing composure with everything she had. "The valet will call you a car," I said. "Don't keep them waiting." Beverly Whitfield picked up her Louis Vuitton bag, straightened her Chanel jacket, and walked out of that private dining room with her chin up and her stride even, and the particular bearing of a woman who has just done something she believes has saved her. I sat at the table alone for a moment after she left. Then I picked up my phone and sent Raymond one word: "Ready?" At 4:47 p.m., Raymond sent back a photograph. Beverly Whitfield at the departures level of JFK Terminal 4, her Louis Vuitton bag on the floor beside her, a briefcase in her hand, and 4 federal agents in dark coats forming a quiet, efficient circle around her. Her mouth was open. Her free hand was raised palm out in the universal gesture of a person saying, "Wait, there's been a mistake you don't understand." There had been no mistake. She had understood perfectly. She had simply believed until that moment that understanding was the same thing as being safe. It isn't. In my experience, understanding is just the first step toward consequence. The distance between the two depends entirely on who is holding the door. I put the phone in my pocket, settled the dinner bill that had gone entirely uneaten, and went home to tell my daughter that the first domino had fallen. I was not at JFK that afternoon. I did not need to be. I was in the elevator of my building riding up to the 38th floor with Raymond's photograph still open on my phone when I felt the particular quality of stillness that comes after a significant thing has been set in motion and cannot be called back. It was not satisfaction exactly. Satisfaction implies an end, and this was not an end. This was the moment when the pieces that had been moving in the dark came into the light and the shape of the whole became visible for the first time. Beverly Whitfield was in federal custody. The flash drive was in an evidence bag with an unbroken chain of custody that would hold up in any court in the country, and Preston Whitfield, wherever he was sitting, with his broken wrist and his expensive legal team, had just become the loneliest man in New York. Savannah was out of the medical suite when I arrived. She had moved herself to the living room at some point during the day, a development that would have alarmed me 24 hours ago, but which tonight felt like exactly the right thing. She was sitting on the long gray sofa with her legs tucked under her and a cup of tea going cold on the end table beside her, and she was watching the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows with the expression of a person who has been thinking hard about something and has not yet arrived at the end of it. She looked up when I came in. Her eyes went to my face immediately, reading it the way she always did now, and what she found there made her sit up straighter. "Tell me," she said. I sat down across from her and told her. All of it. The restaurant, the flash drive, the FBI agents at the service entrance, the photograph Raymond had sent at 4:47. I told it plainly and without theater, the way I would report a completed transaction because Savannah had earned the plain version of things and did not need me to manage what she felt about them. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Her hands were wrapped around the cold tea mug, and she stared into it with her jaw working, slightly processing. Then she looked up. "She's going to take a plea," Savannah said. Her voice was steady, certain. "Beverly, she's going to give them everything they need on Preston to reduce her own sentence. She's been in this long enough to know how it works." She paused. "He knows that too. He knows that right now tonight, his mother is sitting in a federal holding facility deciding how much of him to sell." "Yes," I said. "Good." The word came out hard and flat, and entirely without apology, and the fierceness of it, the clean, unambiguous satisfaction in it, was so much like something Dorothy would have said that I had to look away for a moment out at the city to collect myself. "What happens now? Now we wait for the hearing," I said. "It's been scheduled for December 3rd, 10 days. I looked back at her. Preston is going to come to that courtroom with everything he has left. He has lost his mother, his corroborating witness, and his leverage. That makes him dangerous in the specific way that cornered things are dangerous. He is going to walk in there and fight as hard as he knows how, because it is the only play he has left." Savannah nodded slowly, her fingers tightened around the mug, then released. "And what do we walk in with?" "Gerald's forensic report. The photographs from the safe properly authenticated and entered into evidence through your testimony. Beverly's cooperation, which the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed this evening, will be formally offered in exchange for a reduced charge." I held her gaze. "And you?" She looked at me for a long moment. The city moved behind her through the glass, 10,000 lights shifting and pulsing in the dark, indifferent and enormous, and in the middle of all of it, my daughter sat with her cold tea and her healing bruise, and the particular iron-spined quality of a woman who had walked 3 miles through a Vermont forest in the dark and come out the other side still holding the phone. "Me," she said. "You." I leaned forward slightly. "The photographs are evidence, Savannah, but you are the witness. You are the one who found that safe, who recognized what was inside it, who understood what it meant, who ran 3 miles through a snowstorm to protect it." I kept my voice steady because she needed steady from me, right now, not urgency. Preston's entire legal strategy rests on the argument that you are mentally incompetent. The most powerful thing we can put in front of that judge is you, coherent, composed, and telling the truth in your own words. Savannah set the tea mug down on the end table. She uncurled her legs from beneath her and put her feet on the floor, and sat up straight, her hands folded in her lap, her chin level. She looked in that moment so precisely like the woman I had watched walk out of this building 5 years ago, certain of herself, clear-eyed, utterly decided, that something cracked open in my chest that I could not immediately close. "I'll do it," she said. Her voice did not shake. It did not hesitate. It landed like something that had already been decided long before she said it out loud. "I'll testify. I'll stand up in front of him, and I'll tell the truth, and I'll look him in the eye while I do it." She paused. Her jaw tightened. "I spent 3 years not looking him in the eye, Daddy. I think it's time." I breathed in. Breathed out. "Yes," I said. "I think it is." Raymond knocked on the doorframe from the hallway. We both looked at him. He held up his phone, a notification visible on the screen, something from our contact at the federal building. "Preston's attorney filed a motion this evening," Raymond said. "He's requesting an expedited hearing on the guardianship petition. He wants it moved up." A pause. "He also hired 3 additional partners from Cahill Gordon. He's going full scale." Savannah looked at me. There was no fear in her eyes. There was something harder than fear, something that had been forged out of fear over a long period of time and had come through the process as something else entirely. "Let him," she said. I looked at my daughter. Then I looked at Raymond. 10 days, I said. "Make sure we're ready." Raymond nodded once and moved back down the hallway, his footsteps quiet and purposeful, in the way of a man who has been given a clear instruction and intends to follow it exactly. Savannah picked up her cold tea, looked at it, set it back down, and stood up. "I'm going to bed," she said. "I want to be sharp for the next 10 days. She paused at the entrance to the hallway, her hand resting on the doorframe, and looked back at me over her shoulder. Her face in the ambient light of the city was calm and angular and completely decided. "Daddy?" "Yes." "Thank you for coming to get me." She said it simply. Without drama, the way you say a thing that is so true, it does not require decoration. I know it took a long time. But thank you. My throat did the thing it had been doing, with increasing frequency since Vermont. "Get some sleep, sweetheart," I managed. She nodded and went to bed. and I sat alone in the living room with the city blazing below me and 10 days between us and a courtroom. And I thought about Dorothy, and about the things we do not do in time, and about the particular mercy of being given at 72 years old the chance to do one important thing right. I have spent the night before many difficult things, board meetings where the wrong outcome meant losing everything I had built, negotiations where the margin between success and catastrophe was a single sentence, a single word, a single inflection at the wrong moment. Situations I will not be more specific than that, where the wrong outcome meant someone did not come home. I have spent those nights the way I spend most things, quietly in control, turning the variables over in my mind until they arranged themselves into something I could work with. The night of December 2nd, I could not arrange anything. I sat by the fireplace in the living room for an hour after Savannah went to bed, and I turned the variables over, and they would not arrange. They kept resolving into the same image, my daughter standing in a courtroom tomorrow morning, facing the man who had spent 3 years dismantling her from the inside out and saying the truest things she knew while he sat 12 feet away and tried to use the law to take her back. I was still sitting there when I heard her door open. Savannah came down the hallway in the oversized sweatshirt and soft pants she had been living in since Vermont, her feet bare on the hardwood, her hair loose around her shoulders, the way she had worn it as a child. She stopped in the entrance to the living room when she saw me, and for a moment we simply looked at each other across the room, two people who had spent 5 years not doing this, and were still on some level learning how. I couldn't sleep either, she said. Sit down, I said. I'll get you something warm. I made tea in the kitchen, not the elaborate loose-leaf production that Dorothy had always insisted upon, but the simple functional kind bag in a mug 2 minutes steep, a little honey, and carried both cups back to the living room. Savannah had settled into the corner of the long sofa nearest the fire, her knees drawn up, watching the flames with the contemplative inward expression of someone working through something large. I sat down across from her and set her cup on the end table where she could reach it without moving, and for a few minutes we simply existed in the same room with the fire and the city, and the particular quality of a night that knows it is the last one before something changes. Then Savannah said, "Did you know about Mom before she got sick?" The question landed with the weight of something that had been waiting a long time to be asked. I held my cup in both hands and looked into it for a moment, and I gave her the only thing I had that was worth giving the truth. I knew something was wrong, I said. In the last year, the way she was losing weight, the way she tired easily, the way she would lose words sometimes, in the middle of a sentence, I knew it wasn't right. I looked up at her. I brought Gerald in. He ran tests. The results came back inconclusive, and I accepted that because the alternative, I started again. Because accepting it was easier than what the alternative required me to consider about the people around her. Savannah's eyes filled. She did not look away. You should have looked harder. Yes. I said it without flinching because she deserved that too. I should have looked harder. I was busy looking at other things, and the person I should have been watching most carefully paid for that with her life. My hands tightened on the mug. That is something I will carry until I don't carry anything anymore. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm asking you to know that I know. Savannah pressed her lips together hard. Her chin trembled with the effort of holding something in, and then she stopped holding it and let it come. Her eyes spilling over her breath, hitching in that familiar broken rhythm that I had come to know as well as my own heartbeat over the past 3 weeks. She cried quietly and steadily, her hands wrapped around her mug, not bothering to wipe her face, just letting the tears fall, the way rain falls because they were going to fall regardless, and there was no point anymore in pretending otherwise. I built walls to keep things out, I said, when she had cried long enough that the worst of it had passed through her. That was what I knew how to do, and you grew up inside those walls and they kept the dangerous things out, but they kept other things out too, light, air. I looked at her across the fire. You! Savannah let out a long, shaking breath. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, a gesture so characteristic, so specifically hers, that it hit me somewhere beneath the sternum. I married Preston because he was everything you weren't. She said, her voice rough and honest and completely without accusation. He was calm, he was present. He asked how I was feeling and he remembered the answers and he made me feel like the most important thing in the room. A sound came out of her that was almost a laugh. I was so hungry for that. I had been hungry for it my whole life. And I I walked straight into it. I didn't look. I was so relieved to have found something that felt safe that I stopped asking whether it actually was. You were 29, I said. You wanted something different from what I had given you. There is no sin in that. No, she shook her head. But there's a lesson, a brutal one. She looked at the fire. The most dangerous things don't look dangerous, Daddy. That's the whole point of them. Preston looked like safety. He looked like the opposite of everything I was afraid of. Her jaw tightened. He was just a different kind of the same thing. The fire shifted. A log dropped, sending a cascade of sparks up the flue. Outside, the city moved in its perpetual, indifferent way 38 floors below us. I spent 5 years running from your world, Savannah said. Her voice had gone quieter, finding a different register. Not grief, not anger, but something that had come through both of those things and arrived somewhere harder and more durable. And your world was the only thing that saved me. She looked at me directly with the clear, unflinching gaze of a woman who has decided to stop looking away from things. I don't think I ever understood what you were until now. What it actually means, what it costs, what it's for. She paused. I think Mom understood. I think that's why she stayed. My throat closed. I pressed my free hand against my knee and breathed through it. Savannah watched me do it and did not look away, and did not pretend not to notice which was. I realized the most intimate thing anyone had done for me in a very long time. Are you scared? She asked, quietly, genuinely. I looked at my daughter, at the fire reflected in her eyes, at the bruise on her jaw that had faded to the faintest shadow of yellow, almost invisible, now almost gone. At the woman, she was the woman she had always been, that I had not always been present enough to see. Of losing you again, I said. Every single day of the last 5 years, every single day of the last 3 weeks. I held her gaze. Every day until I stop. Savannah's face did something complicated and private that I did not try to name. She reached across the end table and wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the fire. Tomorrow, she said after a moment. What do you need from me? The truth, I said. Exactly as you remember it. Nothing more and nothing less. The rest is already done. She nodded slowly. The fire crackled. The city hummed its 40-story hum. And somewhere in the space between those two sounds in the warm and quiet room that I had built with walls meant to keep the world out, and had instead managed to keep my daughter away from me for 5 years, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, the way a bone knits slowly and visibly in the dark without announcement. We sat there until the fire burned down to embers. We talked about Dorothy, small things, specific things. The way she laughed the tea, she made the particular expression she wore. When she was about to make a point, she knew was going to land hard. We talked about Connecticut, about the house, about the cobblestone path, and the bicycle, and the things Savannah had not known she would miss until she was gone. We talked at last about the 5 years between us, not the wound of them, but the weight. The specific texture of absence, the shape of a hole that is the exact size and shape of a person. When Savannah finally stood to go to bed, she paused beside my chair. She put her hand on my shoulder, just for a moment, just briefly the lightest possible pressure, and then she was gone down the hallway, and I was alone with the dying fire and the city and the morning that was coming, regardless of anything. I sat there until the last ember went dark. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and went to get ready for the most important day of my life since the day my daughter was born. Preston Whitfield walked into courtroom 4B of the Daniel Patrick Moynihan United States Courthouse at 8:54 in the morning, and he walked in like a man who had already won. I will give him this. He looked the part. The broken wrist was gone from its fiberglass cast and resting in a slim black sling that somehow managed to look intentional, like an accessory. The navy suit was impeccable. The hair was perfect. He had 2 attorneys from Cahill Gordon flanking him on the left and a third behind, and they moved with the coordinated confidence of people who billed at rates that made lesser men flinch and knew it. He did not look at me when he entered. That was his first mistake of the morning. I was sitting in the second row of the gallery, Raymond beside me, both of us in dark suits that cost considerably less than anything at the plaintiff's table. I had brought no visible legal team. I had brought no stack of folders, no coordinated display of resources. I had brought Raymond and my cane and the specific patient quality of a man who has already done everything that needed doing and is simply here to watch it land. Judge Margaret Holbrook entered at 9 o'clock precisely. She was 60 years old, silver-haired, with the unhurried bearing of a woman who had spent 25 years on the federal bench and had long since stopped being impressed by expensive suits or confident postures. She took her seat, arranged her materials, and looked out at the courtroom with the level assessing gaze of someone who could read a room the way I read a balance sheet, completely quickly and without illusion. "We're here on the matter of Whitfield versus Harmon," she said. "Emergency guardianship petition. Counsel for the petitioner, you may proceed." Preston's lead attorney, a tall man named Gerald Merritt, whose reputation I had researched thoroughly, rose and began. He was good. I had expected him to be good, and he did not disappoint. He presented the psychiatric evaluations smoothly and with appropriate gravity, 3 separate assessments from 3 separate licensed professionals, each describing Savannah in language carefully calibrated to sound clinical rather than cruel. He presented witness statements from people who had known Savannah socially, descriptions of erratic behavior, emotional instability, concerning episodes at dinner parties and charity events. He presented a timeline of her alleged deterioration, constructed with the kind of precise footnoted care that takes months to build and minutes to deliver. Then he invited Preston to speak. Preston stood and buttoned his jacket and looked at Judge Holbrook with an expression of such practiced, aching concern that I watched 2 people in the jury box. There was no jury, but there were observers, and several of them were pressed lean forward almost imperceptibly. "Your Honor." Preston said, his voice pitched low and genuine and devastated. "I have spent 3 years watching my wife suffer. I have done everything in my power to support her, to get her help, to keep her safe. What happened 3 weeks ago?" He paused. Let the pause do its work. "When she ran from our home in the middle of the night in a snowstorm, without shoes." Another pause, shorter, sharper. "I wasn't angry. I was terrified. I am still terrified. I just want her to get the help she needs. That's all I have ever wanted." Several of the press observers were writing. One of them was nodding. I looked at my watch. Preston's attorney wrapped up with a request for immediate temporary guardianship pending a full competency evaluation, citing the risk of ongoing harm to Savannah if the matter was delayed further. He sat down with the satisfied air of a man who has delivered exactly what he was paid to deliver. Judge Holbrook made a note. Then she looked across the courtroom at Daniel Forsyth, who was seated at the respondent's table with the unhurried calm of a man holding cards he has not yet shown. "Counsel for the respondent," Judge Holbrook said. "Your response," Daniel rose. "Your Honor, before the court considers any relief, we would ask that you hear directly from Savannah Harmon." He paused. "In person, today." Preston's attorney was on his feet instantly. "Objection, Your Honor. Ms. Harmon has been assessed as mentally incompetent to—" "Mr. Merritt." Judge Holbrook's voice did not rise. It did not need to. It simply acquired a quality that made the rest of the sentence unnecessary. "I will be the judge of competency in my courtroom. That is, in fact, my function." She looked at Daniel. "Where is Ms. Harmon?" Daniel looked toward the back of the courtroom. The doors opened, and Savannah Harmon walked in. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, her dark hair pulled back cleanly, her chin level, her stride unhurried. There was nothing about her that looked fragile. There was nothing about her that looked unstable. There was nothing about her that looked like a woman who needed to be placed under anyone's guardianship. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had survived something terrible and come out the other side of it with her spine intact. Preston saw her. I watched the color leave his face in a slow, comprehensive drain, like water receding from a shore, and I watched his hand grip the edge of the plaintiff's table, and I thought, there it is. There beneath the navy suit and the rehearsed devastation and the $900 haircut is the man who locked my daughter in an attic room and took her shoes. Hello, Preston. We are minutes away from the moment my daughter walked into that courtroom and did something I did not teach her, something no one taught her, something she found entirely on her own. Before I tell you what she carried in that folder, comment justice below. Let me see how many of you have stayed with us this far. This story contains fictional elements added for educational and storytelling purposes. Names, locations, and certain details are coincidental, but what this story stands for is not. My daughter walked to the witness stand like she owned the building, not with arrogance, not with performance, with the specific quiet authority of a woman who has decided that she is done being afraid of the man sitting 12 feet away from her and has made that decision so completely that it shows in the way she moves, The way she sits, the way she sets her folder on the edge of the stand and looks out at the courtroom without flinching. Preston watched her the entire way. I watched him watching her. His jaw was tight, his hand still gripping the table edge, and his eyes tracked her with the focused, calculating attention of a man trying to find the weakness he knows must be there, the tremor, the hesitation, the crack in the composure that he could point to and say, you see how she is? There was no crack. Judge Holbrook addressed her directly. Ms. Harmon, you've asked to make a statement to this court. You may proceed. Savannah looked at the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. Her voice was clear and steady and entirely her own. Then she opened the folder. 3 weeks ago, she said, I found my husband safe. It was open. He had been careless. She looked up briefly, not at Preston, not yet at the middle distance above the gallery. Inside it, I found medical records belonging to my mother, Dorothy Harmon, who died 5 years ago. The records were from a private clinic in Burlington, Vermont, that my mother's own physician had never heard of. They documented 2 years of prescription medications, the same medications, Your Honor, that my husband had been secretly administering to me for the past 18 months. The room had gone very still. Savannah reached into the folder and produced a stack of printed photographs, clean, sharp, properly mounted, in an evidence sleeve that Daniel Forsyth had prepared and authenticated through the court's own filing system 3 days prior. She handed them to the clerk, who carried them to Judge Holbrook. These are photographs I took with my personal device on the night I discovered the safe, Savannah continued. The device has been in secure custody since that night. The photographs are time-stamped and geotagged to the Whitfield estate in Woodstock, Vermont. A forensic technician's affidavit confirming the integrity of the images is included in the evidence package. Judge Holbrook was already looking at the photographs. Her expression did not change. It was not the kind of face that changed easily, but I watched her pause on one page for longer than the others. The final document in the package, Savannah said, is a single sheet of notepaper in my husband's handwriting. It is a timeline. It documents month by month the administration of haloperidol and benzodiazepine to my mother over a 24-month period preceding her death. It bears 2 signatures. She looked directly at Preston for the first time. Her voice did not shake. Her hands did not shake. Her eyes did not waver. My husband's and his mother's. The sound that went through the gallery was not loud. It was the specific collective sound of a room full of people understanding something at the same moment. Preston's lead attorney was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. These documents are unverified fabrications produced by a woman who has been assessed as... The handwriting on that document, Savannah said over him calmly and precisely, is my husband's. I have lived with his handwriting for 5 years. I have signed documents beside it, read notes written in it, received instructions in it. Any forensic document examiner in this country will confirm the match. We have provided 5 years of authenticated comparative samples. She paused. Additionally, Dr. Gerald Sutton, a licensed physician and former trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins, has submitted a forensic medical report to this court documenting 18 months of haloperidol and benzodiazepine in my bloodstream at levels consistent with non-consensual long-term administration. Under Vermont statutes. Title 13, Section 1021, that constitutes criminal poisoning. Mr. Merritt, Judge Holbrook's voice cut through the room without effort. Sit down. Merritt sat. Preston stood up. The composure was gone now, fully completely, with nothing left, beneath it but the raw, panicked face of a man watching his architecture collapse in real time. Your Honor, this is a coordinated attack by her father, who is a known... Mr. Whitfield. Judge Holbrook set the photographs down on her bench. She looked at Preston Whitfield with the patient-level gaze of a woman who has heard every variation of this argument and is not moved by any of them. You will sit down and you will be quiet, or I will have you removed from my courtroom. Those are your 2 options. Choose one. Preston's attorney grabbed his arm and pulled him down. Judge Holbrook looked at the evidence package for a long moment. Then she looked up. This court finds the emergency guardianship petition filed by Preston Whitfield to be without merit, she said. Her voice was level and final, the voice of a door closing. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented today, this court is referring this matter to the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York for criminal investigation into the alleged poisoning of Savannah Harmon and the alleged wrongful death of Dorothy Harmon. She looked at the clerk. So noted. Preston made a sound. I cannot describe it precisely. It was somewhere between a word and something that was not a word, a compressed, desperate exhalation that contained everything he had built and everything he had done, and the specific, irreversible moment of understanding that both of those things were gone. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Two men in dark coats walked in. They moved with the quiet, practiced efficiency of people who do this regularly and have learned that the less theater involved, the smoother it goes. They walked down the center aisle and stopped at the plaintiff's table. Preston Whitfield, the taller of the two, held up credentials. FBI, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, criminal poisoning, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Preston looked at the agents. Then he looked at Savannah. She looked back at him. She did not look away. She did not flinch. She sat in the witness stand of a federal courtroom, with her hands folded in her lap and her chin level and her eyes clear, and she looked at the man who had spent 3 years trying to reduce her to nothing, and she did not give him the satisfaction of a single visible reaction. That, I thought, watching from the second row of the gallery, was the bravest thing I had ever seen. It was braver than the window, braver than the creek, braver than 3 miles in the dark. It was the bravery of a woman who has decided finally and irrevocably that she is done. They put the handcuffs on Preston Whitfield at 11:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my watch when it happened. Not because I needed to record it, not because I was tracking anything. I looked because the moment required a witness, and bearing witness to something, truly bearing it with your full attention and your eyes open, is a different thing from simply being present while it occurs. I had been present for a great many things in my life. I wanted to witness this one. The sound the handcuffs made was very small. A click barely audible over the ambient noise of the courtroom, settling into the aftermath of itself. Preston's lead attorney was speaking rapidly into his client's ear. Something about appeals, about stays, about the procedural remedies still available, and Preston was not listening. Preston was looking at Savannah. She looked back at him. She had not moved from the witness stand. She sat with her hands folded and her chin level and her eyes clear and open, and she gave him the most devastating thing she could possibly have given him in that moment. She gave him nothing. No satisfaction, no visible relief, no tears of vindication or flash of triumph. Just her eyes steady and present, watching him the way you watch something that was once very large and frightening and has now been reduced to its actual size. Preston looked away first. The agents moved him toward the side door with the practiced efficiency of people who do this often enough that it has become procedural. As he passed the end of the gallery, the last point at which our sight lines crossed, he stopped. The agents allowed it briefly. He looked at me. "You think you've won," he said. His voice had lost the careful modulation of the past 3 years. What was underneath was thinner and more brittle, like something that had been held under pressure for too long. I looked at him for a moment. "I think justice has," I said. "That's a different thing." He made a sound that might have been a response and might have been something else entirely. And then the agents moved him through the door, and it closed behind him, and Preston Whitfield, architect, was gone. Savannah stepped down from the witness stand. She walked across the courtroom to where I was standing. I had risen from the gallery when the agents came in, and she sat down beside me without a word, and I felt the slight warm pressure of her shoulder against mine, and neither of us moved away from it. Daniel Forsyth appeared at my other side. He leaned down and said quietly, "The U.S. Attorney's Office will be in contact by end of week. Beverly's cooperation agreement is being finalized. They're looking at felony murder for Dorothy on top of the poisoning charges." He paused. "It's going to be a significant case." "Yes," I said. He nodded once and moved away, because Daniel Forsyth was a man who understood when a conversation was complete. The courtroom was beginning to empty. Reporters were clustered near the exits, their voices a low, urgent hum. Judge Holbrook had retired to her chambers. The clerk was filing documents with the methodical focus of someone for whom the dramatic and the procedural occupy the same undifferentiated space. It was then that I saw them. 2 agents, not the ones who had taken Preston, different ones in different coats, with the specific careful posture of people who are about to do something they have been instructed to do, precisely and without deviation, moving through the emptying gallery toward me. Raymond stepped forward from my left. 30 years. He knew before I did. Mr. Harmon, the first agent held up credentials. Walter Harmon. Yes, I said. We have a grand jury subpoena for your appearance in connection with an ongoing investigation into Harmon Logistics and associated entities. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. If you'd like to call your attorney, specifikan and that won't be necessary. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and produced my own envelope. It was thicker than his. It had the seal of the Department of Justice on the upper left corner and the signature of Deputy Attorney General Richard Morrison on the last page. And it had been signed 3 months ago after 18 months of negotiation conducted entirely outside the public record. I held it out to the agent. I believe you'll find everything in order. My cooperation agreement with the DOJ has been active since September. Deputy A.G. Morrison's office has the original. I've been in compliance since the date of execution. The agent took the envelope. He opened it. He read. His expression did not change. Federal agents are trained not to let their expressions change, but I watched his eyes move across the page with the specific, careful attention of someone recalibrating an expectation. He handed it to his partner. His partner read it. They exchanged a look. We'll need to verify this with the Deputy AG's office, the first agent said. Of course, I said. Raymond has the direct contact number. Take whatever time you need. Savannah had gone very still beside me. I felt rather than saw her turn to look at me, the slight shift of her weight, the almost imperceptible intake of breath. 3 months ago, she said. Her voice was low, meant only for me. September 14th, I said. You signed a cooperation agreement with the Department of Justice. She said it slowly, parsing it. Before you came to get me. I had been in negotiation for 18 months, I said. The agreement was nearly complete when you called. The situation in Vermont accelerated the timeline, but the terms were already set. I looked at her. I told you, Savannah. I planned for every outcome. She stared at me. Her eyes moved across my face the way they had been moving across it for 3 weeks now, reading, assessing, recalibrating, and then slowly starting somewhere behind her eyes and working its way outward until it reached her mouth and transformed her entire face. Savannah Harmon began to laugh. Not a polite laugh, not a controlled one, a real laugh, full and genuine and helpless, shaking her shoulders and catching in her throat and spilling out of her in a way that clearly surprised her as much as it surprised anyone around her, her hand coming up to cover her mouth and failing entirely to contain it. You impossible old man, she said through the laughter, her eyes bright and wet at the corners. You had a deal with the Justice Department this whole time. I had a contingency, I said. There's a difference. She laughed again, and I found to my own considerable surprise that I was smiling a real one, not the controlled functional expression I deployed in the boardrooms and negotiations, but the kind that comes without permission and does not particularly care whether it is appropriate to the occasion. The 2 agents had stepped back to confer by the wall. Raymond was already on his phone, efficient and unhurried. The courtroom continued to empty around us. Somewhere outside the courthouse doors on the cold December street, the city was moving at its usual indifferent pace, entirely unconcerned with what had just occurred in courtroom 4B. Savannah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, that gesture hers completely, and let out a long, unsteady breath. So, what happens now? She asked. Now, I said, we go home. She looked at me. Then she stood and straightened her blazer and offered me her arm, not because I needed it for the cane, but because she wanted to give it, and I understood the difference and I took it. We walked out of that courthouse together, into a cold December afternoon that smelled of exhaust and the particular sharpness of winter air, in a city that does not stop for anything. Savannah's heels on the marble floor of the lobby made a clean, unhurried sound. The heavy doors opened, and the cold hit us both at once. She tightened her grip on my arm, and I thought Dorothy would have loved this. She always said that justice was just patience with consequences. She had been right about that the way she had been right about most things. She had been right about me too in the end. It just took me a very long time to catch up. April came the way it always does in New York, suddenly as if the city had remembered overnight that it was supposed to be beautiful. One morning in early March, the trees were bare, and the gutters were still running, with the dirty remnants of a February that had overstayed its welcome. And then one morning in April, I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, and the trees along the street, 38 floors below, were green. Not the tentative provisional green of early spring, but a full committed green that had apparently decided it was done waiting for permission. The sky above the Hudson was the particular shade of blue that exists only in April in the northeastern United States. A blue so clean and direct, it almost constituted an argument. I was standing at the window with my first cup of coffee when I heard her moving in the kitchen. This had become the rhythm of our mornings. I rose early. I have always risen early. It is a habit built from decades of needing to be the first person aware of how the day was likely to go. And I made coffee and stood at the window while the city assembled itself below me, and at some point between 7 and 7:30, I heard Savannah in the kitchen. The specific sounds of it, the soft percussion of a cabinet opening the particular note of the kettle being filled at the tap, the small domestic music of a person moving through a space they have begun to inhabit rather than merely occupy. She had been here 4 months. In January, when Preston's bail application had been denied for the 3rd time, and the federal grand jury had returned indictments on 7 counts, conspiracy to commit murder, criminal poisoning of 2 persons, fraud wire fraud, and 2 additional counts related to the falsification of medical documents, Savannah had stood in the living room and looked at me and said, "I'm not ready to leave yet. Is that all right?" Oh, and bravest. I had told her that it was more than all right. I had told her she could stay as long as she needed. I had meant it in the way of someone offering a practical accommodation, but what it had become in the 4 months since was something neither of us had named directly, and both of us understood completely. She was staying. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Her attorney had finalized the divorce in February, and the trust fund Dorothy had left her was unfrozen and entirely her own, and she had more than sufficient resources to build whatever life she chose. She was staying because she was choosing to, because something had been reclaimed here in this glass fortress 38 floors above a city that did not care about any of it, that neither of us was ready to put back down. In February, Beverly Whitfield had entered a guilty plea to conspiracy to commit murder and 1 count of criminal poisoning. Her cooperation with the U.S. Attorney's Office had been substantial emails, phone records, financial transactions, and a recorded statement that ran to 47 pages. She had received a sentence of 12 years in a federal facility in Connecticut. Her attorney had described it as a victory for his client. I had read that in the newspaper over my morning coffee and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. Preston's trial was scheduled for October. His legal team at Cahill Gordon had filed 14 pretrial motions, all of which had been denied. The forensic evidence was, as Daniel Forsyth had described it to me, in March airtight in the specific way that happens when the person who committed the crime was arrogant enough to write it down in his own handwriting and keep it in a safe that he occasionally forgot to lock. In March, Savannah had started taking an online course in architectural history through Columbia University's extension program. She did not make an announcement of it. I found out because I walked past the living room one evening and saw her at the oak table with her laptop open and a notebook covered in her precise, careful handwriting. And when I asked what she was doing, she looked up and said, with a directness that reminded me painfully of her mother, "I'm studying. Is there anything you need?" I had said no and gone back to my office and sat there for a long time, thinking about Dorothy, who had wanted to be an architect and had given it up, and about the specific circular mercy of certain things. She was still at the table when I went to bed. Now it was April, and the trees were green, and I was standing at the window with my coffee when Savannah appeared in the entrance to the living room holding 2 mugs. One ceramic dark blue mine and one white hers, and she was wearing the oversized sweatshirt and soft pants that had become her morning uniform, her feet bare on the hardwood, her hair down around her shoulders. "Here," she said, and held out the dark blue mug. I took it from her. Our fingers did not quite touch, but the warmth of the ceramic passed between us like a transmission. She moved to stand beside me at the window. For a moment, we both simply looked at the city in its April light, the buildings catching the morning sun at angles that turned their glass faces gold and silver and a blinding emphatic white. "She called me yesterday," Savannah said. I looked at her. "My attorney." She wrapped both hands around her white mug and looked out at the city with the particular expression she wore when she was delivering information she has already processed and wants me to receive without ceremony. "The divorce is final. The last filing came through. It's done." "Good," I said. She nodded slowly. A long breath moved through her, not a sigh, not relief exactly, but something more fundamental than either like a building settling into its foundation after a long period of stress. She had been carrying the legal weight of it for 4 months, the slow procedural unwinding of 5 years of her life, and now it was done, and what she felt about that was written plainly on her face for anyone who knew how to read it. I knew how to read it. I was learning anyway. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer me honestly. When have I done otherwise?" She gave me a look that was so precisely her mother's, the specific patient expression Dorothy had deployed when I had said something that was technically accurate, but missed the point that I had to look away for a moment out at the Hudson to collect myself. "Are you all right?" Savannah asked. Not tactically, not strategically, just, "Are you all right?" The question surprised me, not because it was unexpected, but because of how directly it landed, how entirely without armor it arrived. In 72 years of living, I could count on one hand the number of times someone had asked me that question, and meant it in exactly that way, stripped of agenda, stripped of context, simply wanting to know the true answer. Dorothy had asked it, regularly. It was one of the things I had not properly valued until it was no longer available to me. I looked at my daughter, at the morning light on her face, at the fading ghost of a bruise that was now entirely invisible, absorbed back into the skin, as if it had never been there, as if the body had decided to stop advertising what had been done to it and get on with the business of being whole. "I think so," I said, "more than I have been in a long time." Savannah studied me for a moment, with those eyes that had learned in 4 months to look at me without flinching and without the old careful distance. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied with what she found, and looked back out at the city. "I'm thinking about the architecture program," she said. "The full degree, not just the extension course." She said it the way she said things she had already decided, not asking permission, not seeking approval, simply informing me of a fact about her own life that she thought I might want to know. "Columbia has a 3-year program. It would mean staying in the city." I did not say anything immediately. I turned my coffee cup in my hands and looked at the green trees below us and thought about what to say and how to say it in a way that was honest, without being the kind of honest that is actually just self-interested. "Your mother," I said finally, "made her tea the same way you make yours. 2 minutes steep, a little too much honey. She said she knew it was too much honey, and she didn't care." I paused. "She used to stand at the window in the mornings in the old house in Connecticut and hold her mug exactly the way you're holding yours right now. Both hands, like it might get away." Savannah had gone very still beside me. She was looking at her hands around the white mug, and when she looked up, her eyes were bright with something that was not quite tears, but was adjacent to them. "I didn't know that," she said. "There's a great deal you don't know yet," I said. "About her, about those years. I was not a man who shared things easily. I kept things in because I thought keeping things in was the same as keeping things safe." I looked at her steadily. "I know better now, and I have time to do it differently if you're willing to let me." Savannah looked at me for a long moment. The city moved behind her, indifferent and magnificent, and the April light fell across the hardwood floor in long, bright rectangles that shifted slowly as the morning advanced. "Columbia is 20 minutes by subway," she said. "I know where Columbia is," I said. "I would need a studio space for the drafting work." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture I had come to recognize as hers. The specific angle of consideration, the look of someone fitting a new piece into a structure they are building carefully and well. "The second bedroom gets good light." "It does." I agreed. She looked at me. I looked at her. And then without ceremony or announcement, the decision was made not with words, because it did not require words, but in the specific quiet way of things that have already been true for a while, and are simply being acknowledged at last. Savannah lifted her mug and took a sip of her tea. "Too much honey," she said. Something moved through me then that I will not try to name, because naming it would reduce it, and some things deserve to remain larger than language. It was grief, and it was joy, and it was the specific aching warmth of a thing that has been lost and found again, and is not the same as it was before, but is perhaps in its changed form more valuable for having been broken. I lifted my own coffee. Outside, the April sun moved higher over the city. Below us, 38 floors down New York went about its business with its customary magnificent indifference, and somewhere in it, Preston Whitfield was sitting in a federal holding facility waiting for October. and Beverly Whitfield was beginning her 12th year, and Dorothy Harmon was gone and had been gone for 5 years, and none of that was different, and none of it could be changed. But this was here. This was now. My daughter in an oversized sweatshirt with her mother's hands around a cup of tea that had too much honey in it, standing in the morning light of a city that did not care about either of us, and planning a life that had nothing to apologize for. A monster had been caged. More than one. A family had been not repaired. That word implies returning to what existed before, and what existed before was not something worth returning to. What we were building was something new, something that had no name yet because it had not existed long enough to acquire one. Something that could only exist because of everything we had survived to get here, the 5 years of silence, the 3 weeks of crisis, the long December nights, and the April morning light, and the particular uncelebrated miracle of 2 people deciding without drama and without fanfare to try again. Dorothy always said, the most honest thing a person can do is show up when it counts. I showed up late. I showed up imperfectly with a broken record and a cane and 72 years of choices I could not take back. But I showed up. And in the end, in this end on this morning, with this light on this city and this woman beside me, who had her mother's hands and her mother's stubbornness and her own particular hard-won grace, I decided that was enough. It had to be enough. And for the first time in a very long time, without effort, without convincing myself, without the particular strain of a man trying to believe something he is not sure is true, it was. I have told you this family story exactly as it happened. No more, no less. Here is what I know now, at 72, that I did not know at 40. Family betrayal does not always come from strangers. It comes dressed in love, in vows, and the careful smile of someone sitting at your dinner table. I missed the signs with Dorothy. I built walls instead of bridges, and my daughter paid the price for both. Don't be like me. Don't wait for the phone call in the middle of the night. Don't let pride and distance do the work that fear started. The people you love, look at them. Really look. Ask the hard questions before the hard questions ask themselves. I am not a good man. I have never claimed otherwise. But God gave me one more chance, one call one night, one daughter standing in the snow, and I did not waste it. This family story taught me that justice is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly at 11:14 in the morning in a courtroom that smells of paperwork and consequence. Family betrayal leaves marks that take years to fade. But they do fade. I have seen it with my own eyes. Preston will face a jury in October. I am not concerned about the outcome. The evidence speaks in a language that requires no translation. If this family story reached something in, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, yet now is a good time to do that. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted with the sole purpose of illumination, not harm. If that's not what you're here for, no judgment. Choose what serves you best.